The morning of July 4, 1969, arrived hot across northern Ohio. The temperature climbed toward 94 degrees by midday. Along Lake Erie's southern shore, families spread blankets on the sand. Boats dotted the water, their white hulls bright against the gray-blue lake. In Toledo, thousands of trees stood still in the thick air. The humidity pressed down like a weight. Dew points reached 82 degrees in Illinois. The atmosphere held more moisture than it could contain. Picnic baskets opened. Charcoal grills sent smoke drifting across parking lots and beaches. Children waded into the shallow water. The lake was calm. Fireworks sat waiting in municipal storage, ready for the displays that would begin after sunset. The day felt ordinary in its summer heaviness. By late afternoon, weather forecasters in Cleveland tracked thunderstorms forming over southeastern Michigan. The storms produced tornadoes west and south of Detroit. Large hail fell. Winds toppled power lines. The thunderstorms began moving southeast, organizing into a single system. The line of storms stretched across the horizon like a dark spine. At 6 in the evening, the sky changed. Clouds appeared low over Lake Erie, rolling at treetop height. Craig Edwards, a newsman chasing the storm in his vehicle, later described what he saw: an inky blackness with no light reflected anywhere, and low rolling clouds paired with shrieking wind and water. The rain moved horizontal to the ground. The Derecho roared ashore. Winds reached 104 miles per hour in Toledo, the highest wind gust ever recorded in the city. Trees snapped at their bases. 5,000 trees fell in Toledo alone. Boats capsized along the lakeshore. 8 people died from falling trees. 3 drowned when their boats overturned. 75,000 homes lost electricity within minutes. The storm moved southeast across northern Ohio during the evening hours. It struck without adequate warning. Families abandoned their plans and ran for shelter. Bonnie Dixon and her family hurried home from a camping trip near Lima. Jim Mollenkopf, 15 years old, watched from his window as the storm consumed Toledo. Behind the Derecho's leading edge, the atmospheric dynamics shifted. The fast-moving line of storms should have continued east and weakened. Instead, warm, moist air from the west continued feeding into northern Ohio at the surface. Northwesterly, winds persisted through much of the atmosphere. The trailing edge of the storm system became nearly stationary along a line from southern Michigan into northern Ohio. New thunderstorms formed along the stalled boundary. They trained over the same areas one after another through the night and into the early morning of July 5. The sky opened. Rain fell in sheets. It pounded roofs and fields. It overwhelmed storm drains. It turned roads into rivers. The deluge had begun. The rain fell without pause. 10 inches dropped in some locations. 14 inches fell near Worcester in Wayne County. The storm lasted 8 to 12 hours. 6,000 square miles received at least 4 inches of rainfall. The soil could not absorb the water fast enough. Fields became lakes. Streams swelled beyond their banks. The Huron River, Vermilion River, and Black River all reached record flood stages. Tributaries that normally ran shallow and calm transformed into torrents. The water gathered momentum as it flowed downhill toward larger waterways. Rivers across north-central Ohio rose rapidly. Killbuck Creek in Holmes County climbed 20 feet above its normal level in approximately 1 hour. The gauge at Killbuck recorded a stage of 26.4 feet on July 5, nearly 8 feet above what would later be designated major flood stage. 95% of the buildings in the town of Killbuck stood underwater. The Tuscarawas River at Massillon reached its second highest level ever recorded, exceeded only by the catastrophic flood of 1913. The river crested at 16.43 feet, just above moderate flood stage. 12 men worked through the night to close gates on a railroad opening between levees near the flooded river. Their effort prevented the water from rising 10 feet higher and saved millions in additional damages. In Wayne County, 9 inches of rain fell in less than 15 hours. The The water ran off saturated ground into Apple Creek, Little Apple Creek, and Kilbuck Creek. The discharge at 50 gauging sites was measured after the flood subsided. At 40 of those sites, the streams were unregulated by dams or control structures. 5 sites recorded peak discharges 4 times larger than a 50-year flood. 17 sites exceeded twice the discharge of a 50-year flood. On the flat, poorly drained land of Ottawa and Sandusky counties, water spread across the landscape until fields disappeared beneath a continuous sheet of floodwater extending to the horizon. The soil held the rain like a shallow basin. There was nowhere for it to go. The streets of Mansfield filled with 4 feet of water. Industries in Youngstown and Canton shut down as floodwaters reached machinery on factory floors. Most sections of Ashland and Wayne counties remained flooded and isolated for 2 days. Roads became impassable. Bridges were submerged or damaged. Communities were cut off from outside help. The flood moved through the darkness. It rose in basements while families slept upstairs. It lifted cars from driveways. It pushed through doorways and climbed stairwells. By dawn on July 5, the scale of the disaster was becoming clear. Owen Meller served as the marshal of Kilbuck during the flood. He watched the water rise unbelievably high in about an hour. The chaos arrived without warning. The smell came later, after the water receded, a thick odor of mud and decay that clung to everything. There was no clean water available to wash away the filth. Linda Frenette had a 1-year-old child when the flood struck Kilbuck. Emergency crews would not allow people back into town unless they had a compelling reason. She later said the flood was far worse than the ice storm of 2003. The devastation felt incredible. The town lost community members. In Kilbuck, John McMillan, 86 years old, was found dead inside his flooded house trailer. Paul O'Donnell watched his neighbors Earl and Ada Elliott disappear into floodwaters that surrounded their house. The elderly couple had parked their car in O'Donnell's driveway after returning from the grocery store. They told him they would be right back after taking in the first load of groceries and getting their dog. They walked across the highway and started down their lane with groceries in hand. O'Donnell watched from his driveway as the couple moved toward their home. The water took them. Earl was 57. Ada was 56. Near Jeromesville, Homer Hostetler, a Smith Dairy truck driver from Dalton, drowned after his semi-truck left the highway, likely due to standing water on the road. It is believed he was swept away in floodwaters when he attempted to exit the disabled truck. He was 57 years old. In Ashland, 2 highway patrol officers, a gas station owner, and a truck driver pulled a family of 4 from their car after it was caught in floodwaters and swept off Interstate 71. The water carried the vehicle as if it weighed nothing. The flood claimed multiple victims in Wayne County. In Worcester, 14 people died, many of them drowning as water filled homes and streets. A 6-week-old baby was among the dead. A 6-year-old boy, 2 police officers on duty, families trapped in rising water. The names were later recorded: John Baumgartner, 34, Basil Bright, 38, Patrolman Robert Goodrich, 56, Roger Henthron, 6, Patrolman Paul Nisley, 30, Patricia Lovett, 12, John Mann, 37, Lovina Taylor, 34, Doris Worth, 26, Sharon Worth, 4. The flood also killed Ginger Hinkle, 7 years old, in Millersburg. It killed Mabel France in the Kidron-Norville area. It killed Robert Dickens, S.R., and his 16-year-old son, Robert J.R., in Burbank. Each death represented a moment when water moved faster than escape, a basement that filled too quickly, a road that collapsed underfoot, a current stronger than muscle and will. Across northern Ohio, infrastructure failed under the assault. Power stations faltered as floodwater reached transformers and electrical equipment. The hum of electricity faded. Cities dimmed section by section. Entire neighborhoods went dark. Rail yards disappeared beneath muddy water. Freight cars sat marooned on submerged tracks. The Tuscarawas River flooded the rail yard at Massillon. Without the heroic work of 12 men closing levee gates, the flooding would have been catastrophic. The water would have crested 10 feet above flood stage, inundating the city. Factories shut down as machinery drowned. Workers evacuated through knee-deep water. Steel mills, foundries, and manufacturing plants fell silent. The economic engine of northern Ohio stalled. Entire districts required evacuation. Families woke to find water in their homes. They climbed to second floors, then to attics. Some broke through roofs to escape the rising tide. Rescue boats navigated through streets turned into canals. Volunteers worked through the night, pulling people from trees, from rooftops, from cars swept off roads. Approximately 700 boats were damaged or destroyed. Most of them capsized and scattered like toys along the Lake Erie coastline during the Derecho's initial assault. Small pleasure boats that had been anchored for the fireworks show were torn from their moorings. The U.S. Coast Guard rescued 100 boaters from the lake. 32 homes were completely destroyed. 10,000 homes sustained damage. 300 mobile homes were damaged or destroyed. 180 farm buildings collapsed or were swept away. 104 small businesses were lost. 7,000 cars were damaged by wind, water, and debris. Roads buckled under the force of moving water. Pavement cracked and sank. Bridges coated in debris groaned under the strain. Some collapsed. Concrete and steel twisted like paper. Sections of highway disappeared, washed away by creeks that had become rivers. The damage extended from Toledo to the Pennsylvania border. A continuous swath of destruction marked the Derecho's path and the subsequent flooding. In places, the damage was total. In others, it was merely devastating. The line between the two felt arbitrary, a matter of elevation, drainage, or luck. The flood killed 14 people in Wayne County alone. More drowned as vehicles were swept off roadways or as they tried to escape rising water in their homes. In total, the Derecho and subsequent floods killed an estimated 46 people and injured 559. The death toll made it one of the deadliest weather events in Ohio's history. By the morning of July 5, the rain had stopped. The water began slowly to recede. What remained was silence. A wet, heavy silence broken only by the sound of dripping water and the calls of searchers looking for the missing. The water withdrew slowly, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Mud coated everything. It lined the sides of buildings in thick brown stripes that marked how high the flood had risen. In Kilbuck, markers showed water levels reaching 4 feet high on Main Street buildings. Near State Route 60 outside town, the flood peaked at 11 feet, 4 inches on a bridge. Roads lay buried beneath layers of silt. The sediment hardened in the summer heat, turning streets into cracked expanses of dried mud. Debris hung in trees, clothing, pieces of furniture, chunks of building material. Entire sections of homes had been carried downstream and deposited in fields miles from their foundations. Twisted metal littered industrial zones. Machinery rusted in the open air, exposed to sun after being submerged in floodwater. Factory equipment was warped and unusable. The smell of river mud mixed with diesel fuel, chemicals, and decay. The odor persisted for weeks. Residents returned to find their homes gutted. First floors were empty shells. Everything porous, drywall, insulation, wood framing, had absorbed contaminated floodwater and would need to be removed. Furniture was destroyed. Appliances were ruined. Family photographs dissolved into pulp. In Kilbuck, 95% of structures had been underwater. The recovery process stretched on for months. Volunteers from neighboring counties arrived to help clear debris. The Red Cross established communications via amateur radio operators. Food and clean water were brought in by truck. Power was restored gradually, section by section. Orville remained without electricity for 7 to 10 days. Electricians worked long hours to address safety concerns and restore power to businesses and health services. Hoffman Electric Company crews labored through the aftermath, making the town functional again one building at a time. The flood revealed gaps in preparedness. Weather forecasts had mentioned the possibility of severe weather early on July 4, but when no storms materialized by late afternoon, the warnings were largely forgotten. The public had gathered for fireworks displays, unaware of what was approaching. The derecho arrived with little effective warning. The stationary thunderstorms that followed had not been predicted. The event prompted changes. The Chippewa Subdistrict was created to implement flood control measures in the region. Work plans that had been filed in 1960 were finally prioritized. A system of 8 dams and channel improvements was designed and built by the Soil Conservation Service along Chippewa Creek, Little Chippewa Creek, and River Styx. The goal was to prevent future disasters in communities like Seville, Sterling, Creston, Rittman, and Clinton. Flood inundation maps were developed for vulnerable areas, including Kilbuck Creek near the village of Kilbuck. Digital maps were created by the U.S. Geological Survey in cooperation with Holmes County and provided to the National Weather Service. The maps showed predicted flood extents based on forecasted stream stages, allowing emergency management personnel to anticipate where flooding would occur and plan evacuations accordingly. The disaster also underscored the need for improved radar technology and meteorological understanding. In 1969, weather radar was limited. Satellite imagery was rudimentary. The science of derechos was not well understood. Forecasters today have tools that would have made the July 4 disaster, if not preventable, at least more survivable. Early warning systems, better radar coverage, and instant communication would have saved lives. The economic toll was staggering. More than $66 million in damages by 1969 standards, equivalent to approximately $450 million in 2019 dollars. The figure accounted for destroyed homes and businesses, damaged infrastructure, lost crops, and economic disruption. Insurance claims overwhelmed local agencies. 50 years later, survivors gathered to remember. The Kilbuck Valley Historical Society teamed with the Holmes County Historical Society to present a commemoration. White PVC poles with blue signs marking flood levels were placed along Main Street, Railroad Street, and Water Street in Kilbuck. The markers allowed younger generations to see how high the water had risen, a visceral reminder of the power of moving water. The July 4-5, 1969 flood remains the most devastating summer flooding event in Ohio's recorded history. It exceeded the scope of other floods in its intensity, its suddenness, and its lethality. Rivers that had never flooded reached record stages. Communities that thought themselves safe discovered they were not. The disaster reshaped how Ohio approached flood risk. It demonstrated that catastrophic flooding could occur in summer, driven not by snowmelt but by extreme rainfall over saturated ground. It showed that small creeks could become killers. It proved that preparation and infrastructure were not luxuries but necessities. The flood also left something else behind: stories. Accounts passed down through families of survival and loss. Memories of the smell, the chaos, the dark water rising in the night. The recollection of neighbors helping neighbors, of strangers becoming rescuers, of communities pulling together in the aftermath. Those who lived through the flood never forgot the speed with which disaster arrived. 1 hour. That was how long it took for Kilbuck Creek to rise 20 feet. 1 hour for a town to disappear beneath water. 1 hour for lives to change forever. The silence after the flood was not emptiness. It was the pause before rebuilding. It was grief made audible. It was the moment northern Ohio understood that the land could turn against those who lived on it, and that survival depended on respect, preparation, and memory.